Hello guys and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to go over the root system of our roses, and roses are in fact able to grow over 5 different kinds of roots. And today we're going to go over the most important ones. So without further delay, let's get this show on the road and let's get our first picture up here. And the first kind of root that roses are capable of growing are the structural roots, also known as anchor roots. These type of roots are what impresses people the most. You immediately see it when the bare root roses arrive. People go like, oh, that's some big roots or that's some small roots. And what they usually refer to is the structural roots or the anchor roots. And they get this name because they stabilize the rose to the soil. They anchor the rose against the wind. But they also have 2 other roles, and some of them are really important. They also act like a bank for the rose, where the rose can store carbohydrates, sugar molecules. So it kind of acts like our own fat storage. We hide food away from the winter, and so does the rose. And that happens in the structural roots. They also do serve as a kind of a highway system where water and other things, the nutrients, can be transported. But they don't really handle the absorption of them. That is another root type we'll get into now. So let's go to the next root type. The next root type is feeder roots, and these roots are these kind of like like a sieving thread, very, very tiny roots that are kind of like light brown to white, depending on how young they are. And they can absolutely go everywhere. If you've seen a potted rose, they can be completely meshed out by all these feeder roots. And the feeder roots is kind of like what the name implies. These are the roots that handle air absorption, they handle water absorption, they handle nutrient absorption. So they are really some quite important roots you can't neglect in your roses. And when I see a lot of feeder roots, it actually impresses me a lot more than when I see a lot of structural roots. But ideally, you want a lot of both. Now, the issue with feeder roots is they are kind of fragile. If you move your rose, you're kind of setting the feeder roots back around 8 weeks. They take around 2 weeks to get the first growth going, and around 6 to 8 weeks to really be back to a full growth habit. So every time you move your roses, you're setting them back 8 weeks because the feeder roots need to regrow after they have been damaged. And the feeder roots are also the ones that kind of gets destroyed if you leave your roses too long in the water. They kind of rot and swell up and die out, and then you'll be like in springtime, oh, why isn't my rose doing anything? And that is of course because the rose doesn't have any feeder roots, and that can be a real issue if your rose has had a very long winter, and a lot of those bank accounts or those stores where the roses hides all its food is kind of low and it has no feeder roots. Then the rose can be in a very difficult position. Now, one thing to remember about roots is they do grow during the autumn and the winter as long as temperature is above 7 degrees Celsius. So they do grow, and that is also why we often recommend people to grow bare root roses during the winter season or late in autumn, because it is usually very wet, the soil is very wet. And if you have a lot of these days where the temperature is around these 7 to 8 degrees, the rose roots can actually still grow. They just grow a bit slower, but you do end up with a rose that is more healthy when the next season comes, because it has had a bit of time during winter to establish those roots, while the temperature has been a bit high on some days. Often during winter it's very cold, but you do have those days where the temperature can vary between 5 and 10 degrees, and roses can actually grow the roots as long as it is above 7 degrees. They just don't grow them that fast. They usually want around 22 to 24 degrees before the roots are really growing quite fast, but they can absolutely grow at a lower rate, even around 7 Celsius. So that was the feeder roots, the most important roots in my opinion to really focus on getting healthy. And you also want to remember not to disturb them all the time. They easily break, they easily get disturbed, and they are where your rose really gets all its food from, not the structural roots. So just keep that in mind. I know the structural roots are more impressive than these tiny ones, but it is really these tiny ones that feed the rose. The other ones are the bank account and the foundation and the highway. So let's continue here. The next one is these adventitious roots, I suppose they're named. I often call them baby roots because they're what happens when you make a rose cutling, and the first type of roots are these type of roots, these little white roots. Some people also call them primordial roots, so there's a lot of different names for it. But it is essentially a root that can turn into many different types of roots. It can regenerate. And there's also another type of root I haven't gone into called a crown root. A crown root is also a root capable of regeneration, and it is right below the crown of the rose. And there's one more root, but it is only something you will have to pay attention to if you're doing seed, if you're sowing seeds of roses, and that is, I believe in English it's called a taproot. It is kind of this pillar root that goes straight down and anchor it. The young seedling, the young rose seed. But usually that gets broken off or destroyed when you move roses for the bare root sale. So usually people don't get those, and usually we don't do roses sown by seeds. So, but these baby roots, as I call them what you want. They're extremely fragile. They're very easy to break, and you have to make sure when you're doing cutlings and you're dealing with these kind of roots that the young cutling can't move about, because these roots are so easy to break like you wouldn't believe. They're so fragile, they're nearly made of glass. I would nearly say glass is even more resilient than they are. Very, very easy to break these roots. But they're so important because they are the first roots that the rose will get the nutrients from, and they are the roots capable of a lot of regeneration and forming other types of roots. So very important roots, those ones. But if I really want you to take something away from this video, it is the fact that the structural roots are not necessarily the most important. They are a good, nice bank account, and if the rose has a lot of nice structural roots, that means it has a lot of energy available. But when it comes down to it, what will really make your roses survive are the feeder roots. Those are really what you want to see nice and healthy, and a lot of them. So if you only take one thing away from this video, it is to focus a bit more on the feeder roots and maybe a little bit less on the structural roots, even though they're very important. Now guys, this was it for today. Maybe another thing I would highlight is that the crown of the rose, if the crown of the rose dies out, or not dies out, dries out, if it gets very dry, what can happen is it can't form roots. And that's again why you want to plant the rose crown a little bit down in the soil and to make sure there's enough moisture around it. So really keep that in mind also when it comes to forming roots around the crown of the rose. You don't want that to be sticking up or not being covered by anything, or being in a very dry situation where airflow can get in under it and stuff like that. But if you're just taking away one key point, it is that feeder roots are so important in your roses, not just the structural roots. So take care out there, guys.